Now we're going to talk about the changes in free energy during a chemical reaction, and we will relate it to the process of enzymatic activity. Now we're going to talk about free energy, and free energy is related to the amount of work that a system can do. And your textbook shows us this hydroelectric system that are a good way to try to understand this. And here we have two types of hydroelectric systems. Both are open. However, in one case, the relationship is spontaneous, while in the other one, you require energy. And I want that you try to see why this one is spontaneous and why this one requires energy. So try to think about it. So in the first case, this one is spontaneous because gravity is helping us and the water is flowing in this direction and is going out here, and you can perform some work. This is rotating, so you are collecting energy. So here in this case is considered to be a negative delta G, so it's a spontaneous reaction. However, in this case, this is going in the opposite direction, and this is supposed to go up. So this is supposed to be a positive delta G. So you will need to do some work you will need some energy to do this type of movement. So for example, you will need a motor here to do this type of movement and change against the current. So let's summarize what we just talked. So what is free energy and the delta G? Free energy is the maximum amount of work that a thermodynamic system can perform in a process at a constant temperature. And the second thing that I told you that is important is that only processes with a negative delta G are spontaneous, such as this one, the one that I show you. And as I said, the third thing that I told you is that spontaneous processes can harness to perform work. Now I'm going to show you a chemical reaction that takes place in living organisms. That is the conversion of glutamic acid into glutamine. So here you have two reagents and here you have one product. However, if you see here, the delta G is positive. So as a result, this chemical reaction will require energy. So in few lectures, we will talk about enzymes and how they are able to change this delta G. However, if they don't have an enzyme, they can invest energy. That in terms of energy, the coin of energy is ATP. Every time that you want to invest energy in the cell, you will use this coin that is ATP. So let me show you how it works. So here I'm going to show you how free energy change for a couple reaction. And I want that you see it's the same reaction, but here you have this magic molecule of ATP that allowed the reaction to take place. Why? Because although this delta G is positive, the delta G of the ATP is very negative. So as a result, if you see here you find that the net delta is negative. When you perform this operation here, you see that you still have a very negative number. So every time that you use ATP, the ATP will break into two ADP and a phosphate group. So this is the price that you have to pay to make this type of chemical reaction. So again, remember, first thing that I want that you remember, ATP is very important for a cell. And why is important? Because it allows us to change the net delta G to perform some chemical reactions. In other words, the ATP can be considered as the motor. Here I talk about a coin, here I can talk about the motor that produces energy that allowed the chemical reaction to take place spontaneously. Now I'm going to talk a little bit in more detail what is happening with the ATP. So in the conversion of glutamic acid to glutamine, so this is what we previously studied, and we said that as this is positive, it's not possible to occur, it doesn't happen spontaneous, so we couple exergonic and plus endergonic reactions. And how we do that to make this spontaneous, to the ATP will drive the reactions. The ATP will drive this endergonic reaction. So in this case, what generally happens is that you have the glutamic acid and this ATP that, remember, has 3 phosphate groups. And what you're going to do is to transfer a phosphate group to another molecule. So in this case, you see that the ATP, the phosphate group, and phosphorylate this intermediate. And now instead of having an ATP, you have an ADP, so you only have 2 phosphate groups. So this molecule now is called a phosphorylated intermediate. And in the final step, you will have this final product, but no, you are not going to have ATP anymore. You're going to have ADP plus an inorganic phosphate. And this is how ATP drives the endergonic reactions by coupling exergonic and endergonic reactions. Let's talk a little bit more about the free energy, and let's talk about these hydroelectric systems again. And I want that you think about this. If you see here, these two regions are very asymmetrical. So these, as they are asymmetrical, there's a flow here that produces energy that allow us to collect more energy. So the more free energy, you will have a higher G, and the system should be less stable, and it will allow us to have a great work capacity. However, I want that you see this system that is the opposite. In this case, you are not going to have movement. This is the first difference. The second difference, if you see, is that you have a delta G that is equal to 0. So here you don't need to invest energy, but you're not going to produce energy because this system is in equilibrium. So in this system, you're not going to have a lot of capacity to produce work. So the less free energy, you will have a lower G. Your system will be more stable. While this one here, it was unstable and there was a flow. Here, this is very stable. There is no changes, and there will be less capacity to do some work. So remember, in an spontaneous change, free energy of a system decreases to be lower than 0. So this way it will be negative, and the system becomes more stable, and the release of energy can be harnessed to do some work. Now we're going to talk about metabolism, that in simple words is converting food into energy. So everything that we eat and we drink, we turn it into energy. So for example, here you take glucose, and you take that glucose and you break it into small carbons and hydrogens, and you break it, and as a result of that, you can harness energy through a process that we will talk, that is self-respiration, and as a result you release CO2. And that energy that you harness from that process, it allows you to repair the body, to reduce movement, but it will require that you keep eating and getting more food. And here we are going to talk about the different complex biochemical process. And we are not going to only talk about respiration, we're also going to talk about photosynthesis, we're going to talk about the different enzymes that do this type of work. Now I'm going to talk about anabolic and catabolic pathways that are fundamental to try to understand the metabolism. And both are required to maintaining the cell's energy balance. And in this schematic, I want to show you what is an anabolic pathway. Here you have 1, 2, 3, and for simpler molecules. They are monomers. They can be amino acid, they can be glucose, they can be lipids. But when you add energy, you are able to create, instead of 4 molecules, you can have one large molecule. You are creating just a polymer. So anabolic pathways are those that require energy to synthesize larger molecules. So you go from simpler molecules to large molecules when you have anabolic pathways. And an example of that, it could be the synthesis of proteins. Here, as I said, you have amino acids. Then you can produce a peptide, and when you have multiple peptides, you can form a protein. And this is an example of an anabolic reaction. Another example, it could be a molecule for storage, to go from monosaccharides to a polysaccharide. So here you can have a monosaccharide like glucose, as I said before, and you can produce a polysaccharide like a starch, and you can store the sugar in the body. And in this way, plants can store sugar in the cells. Now we're going to talk about catabolic pathways, and in this case, we go in the opposite direction. Well, here you have one large molecule. Here you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 simple molecules, and you will release energy. So you go from a polymer to a polymer. So, for example, when you need energy in your body, what you do, you take the polymers and you break it, and you create simple molecules. So an example of that is when you have a polysaccharide and you break it into pieces and you produce a monosaccharide. So, well, in the previous case, we had an anabolic reaction. So, for example, we have so much food in our body that we start storing all this sugar, and there is a point that you say, no, we are getting hungry, we need to have simpler molecules and to get energy from those. So we are going in the opposite direction, and now we're going from a polymer to a monomer. So here we will have a catabolic reaction.